My mother screamed my sister's name and pulled a soaking wet stranger into her arms before the woman had even stepped fully through the door. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching this reunion unfold in real time. And somewhere underneath the shock, a colder, more clinical part of my brain was already running calculations. Because I am a forensic genetic genealogist, I spend my working life matching fragments of DNA to family trees for police departments and cold case units. And within 30 seconds of looking at this woman's face, something in my body, some instinct built over 6 years of professional pattern recognition, was screaming that this was not my sister. My name is Ava Kessler, and 10 years ago, my younger sister Ivy walked out of our house after a screaming argument with our mother and never came back. She was 16 years old, furious about a curfew, wearing her favorite denim jacket, and she slammed the front door so hard the framed photograph in the hallway cracked down the middle. None of us knew that would be the last time any of us ever saw her. The police searched the woods behind our property for 6 weeks. Volunteers combed the reservoir trail with cadaver dogs. They found her backpack half buried near the water, soaked through, containing her wallet, a broken phone, and a paperback novel with a bent spine. They never found anything else. No body, no confirmed sighting, no answer. For a decade, my mother left Ivy's bedroom exactly as it was on the night she disappeared. The same faded band posters curling at the corners. The same chipped nail polish bottles lined up on the dresser, dust settling into their caps. Every year on Ivy's birthday, my mother baked a cake that nobody ate, set a single place at the table, and sat with it until the candles burned down to nothing. I used to think it was heartbreaking. Now I understand it was the only ritual keeping her upright. I handled my grief differently. I built an entire career around not giving up. I became a forensic genetic genealogist, the kind of scientist police departments and medical examiners call when they need to identify unmarked graves, unidentified remains, and decades-old cold cases using nothing but a sliver of degraded DNA and a painstakingly reconstructed family tree. I told people I did it because the science fascinated me. The truth is quieter and less flattering. Somewhere in the back of my mind, every single case I solved for a stranger was practice for the day someone finally found my sister, whether she was alive or in a drawer in a medical examiner's office 3 states away. 3 weeks before that Tuesday, I had no idea my sister's face was about to walk back into my life wearing someone else's memories. Before I tell you exactly what I noticed in the first 10 minutes that made my blood run cold, and how far I had to go to prove what my instincts already knew, take a second and tell me, what time is it where you're listening from right now? And is it raining where you are tonight? I read every single comment, and I always love knowing where in the world these stories find you. The rainy Tuesday started like any other dinner night at my mother's house. I arrived at 6, let myself in with my spare key, and found my mother in the kitchen, humming along to the radio while she stirred a pot of soup, the way she'd done every Tuesday for as long as I could remember. We were setting the table when the doorbell rang. My mother wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. A woman in her mid-20s stood on the porch, drenched from the storm, shivering, holding nothing but a soaked canvas tote bag against her chest. "Mom," the woman said, her voice cracking. "It's me, it's Ivy." My mother didn't breathe for a full 3 seconds. Then she made a sound I had never heard a human being make before, something between a scream and a sob, raw and involuntary, and pulled the stranger into the house, into her arms, sobbing into wet hair that smelled like rain and someone else's shampoo. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching my mother hold a stranger and call her by my sister's name, and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath my feet. The woman had Ivy's same dark hair, cut a little shorter now, the same slight gap between her front teeth. Even a faint scar above her left eyebrow, positioned in roughly the right place, the kind of detail that would convince almost anyone. She said her name was Ivy Kessler. She said she'd been living under a different identity for years, drifting through 3 different states, working cash jobs, too afraid and too ashamed of what she'd done to ever come home. She cried when she saw her old bedroom, frozen exactly as she'd left it. She hugged our mother with the exact right amount of trembling desperation, like she'd rehearsed the choreography of coming home 100 times in her head. But I am not most people. I spend my professional life picking apart human identity down to base pairs of genetic code, learning to notice the difference between a memory and a beautifully constructed replica of one. And something about the way this woman moved through our house felt like she was reading a map instead of remembering a childhood. The first crack appeared within the hour, during dinner. My mother asked her gently, almost carelessly, "Do you remember what you used to call your father's old cat?" It was a soft, testing question, the kind grieving mothers ask without even realizing they're conducting an interrogation, searching for proof in the smallest corners of shared history. The woman paused for half a second too long before answering. "Whiskers," she said finally, smiling. "Our father's cat was never named Whiskers. His name was Biscuit, and he had one permanently crooked ear from a fight with a raccoon when Ivy was 11 years old. Ivy used to sneak that ugly, mean-tempered cat into her bed every single night, curling him against her stomach despite my father's rule against pets on the furniture. Anyone who was truly Ivy Kessler would never have hesitated on that question, let alone answered it wrong." I said nothing. I smiled, refilled her water glass, and watched her hands shake slightly as she held it. Not from cold, I realized, but from the visible effort of performing grief she didn't actually carry inside her. A second crack appeared 20 minutes later. My mother mentioned, almost in passing, our old neighbor's dog, a golden retriever named Max, who used to chase Ivy down the driveway every morning before the school bus arrived. The woman nodded along warmly, said she missed that silly dog, and asked if he was still around. Max had died 8 years ago, and Ivy would have known that immediately because Ivy had been the one who cried at his funeral in the backyard, the one who insisted on a small wooden cross made from popsicle sticks. This woman had simply agreed with a memory that had never existed, filling in blanks with generic warmth instead of specific, lived history. That night, after the woman claiming to be my sister went to sleep in Ivy's old bed, I sat in my car outside my mother's house for 2 hours, staring at the porch light, running through every possibility in my analytical mind. Either this woman was somehow impossibly my sister, permanently altered by 10 brutal years, her memory fractured by trauma into strange, unreliable fragments, or she was something else entirely, something engineered and deliberate. I am a scientist. I don't operate on hope no matter how badly I wanted to. I operate on evidence. The next morning I drove back to my mother's house before dawn, before the woman claiming to be Ivy had woken up. I found the water glass she'd used the night before, still sitting untouched on the nightstand, a faint smudge of her lip print visible along the rim in the early light. I slid it carefully into a paper evidence bag from my professional field kit, the same kind I use on active law enforcement cases, and drove straight to my lab before my shift officially began. My colleague Priya Chen has run thousands of familial DNA comparisons alongside me over the past 6 years. She's sharp, discreet, and the only person in my professional life I trusted enough to bring this to without triggering alarms inside my own fractured family. "Ava," Priya said, studying the sample intake form I'd filled out under a false internal case number, her eyebrows raised. "This isn't cleared through the lab director. What is this really?" "It's my sister," I said quietly, setting the sealed bag on her desk. "Or it isn't. I need to know before my mother signs anything." "Signs what?" I hesitated, because until that exact moment, I hadn't said the second, uglier thing out loud, the thing that had been eating at me since the woman first stepped onto the porch soaking wet. My grandfather set up a trust before he died. It transfers directly to Ivy on her 26th birthday, which is in 19 days, administered by our family lawyer. If Ivy doesn't come forward and formally claim it by then, in writing, in person, the entire trust automatically reverts to a wildlife conservation charity instead. My mother mentioned the exact deadline to this woman over breakfast yesterday morning. I watched her face very carefully when she heard the number. Priya's expression sharpened. What was the number? $240,000. Priya ran the comparison overnight using our fastest rapid turnaround protocol, cross-referencing the unknown sample against my own DNA profile, which had already been on file for years from research I'd personally conducted trying to identify my sister in case her remains were ever recovered from some unmarked location. The results came back at 6:14 the next morning. I was sitting alone in my car in the empty lab parking lot when Priya called. "Ava," she said, her voice careful and clinical, the exact tone she uses when she's about to deliver something devastating to a grieving family. "There is zero shared DNA between this sample and your profile. Not half. Not a quarter. Zero. This woman is not related to you. Not as a sister, not as a cousin, not as anything at all." I sat in that dark, empty parking lot for a long time, staring through the windshield at nothing, feeling something strange and heavy settle over my chest. It wasn't shock exactly. Some quiet, exhausted part of me had already known from the moment she got the cat's name wrong. "There's something else," Priya added, her voice dropping lower. "I ran her profile against our public genealogy database out of curiosity. I got a partial hit. Her name isn't Ivy anything. Her genetic markers connect her to a woman named Renee Castillo, currently listed in county court records across 2 different states as a defendant in prior identity fraud cases. Both times, she inserted herself into grieving families claiming to be a missing relative. Both times, the families gave her money before anyone caught on." I gripped the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles ached, my mind moving fast now, cold and analytical, the exact way it does when I'm reconstructing a family tree out of fragments no one else can see the shape of yet. "Someone found her," I said slowly, thinking out loud. "Someone who knew about Ivy's disappearance in specific detail, knew about the trust, knew the exact 26-day window, and went looking for a woman who resembled her closely enough to pass a surface inspection from people desperate to believe." "Who would have access to information that specific?" Priya asked. I already knew the answer before she finished the question. Only one person outside our immediate family had access to the precise terms of my grandfather's trust, the exact dollar figure, and the exact calendar date it would either transfer or dissolve. Our family lawyer, Ethan Brooks. A man who had sat across from my mother at every single holiday dinner for 15 years, who had personally administered my grandfather's entire estate after his death, and who stood to lose his ongoing management fee, nearly $9,000 a year, the moment that trust reverted to a charity that would immediately transfer its assets to an entirely different management firm. I didn't call the police yet. I needed to see this through to its actual source before it disappeared into a haze of denial, lawyered-up silence, and carefully worded non-admissions. That afternoon, I drove to Ethan Brooks's law office downtown, unannounced, my hands steady on the wheel despite the fury simmering underneath my calm. His assistant tried to tell me he was in a meeting. I walked past her anyway and pushed open his office door. Ethan looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from mild irritation to something tighter and more careful the moment he saw my face. "Ava, this is a surprise. Is everything all right with your mother?" "You tell me," I said, closing the door behind me and setting a single printed page on his desk. The DNA comparison report, the 0% match highlighted in yellow. Because the woman sitting in my mother's kitchen right now wearing my sister's old sweater isn't related to us at all. Her name is Renee Castillo. And the only person who knew the exact terms of my grandfather's trust down to the dollar was you. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. I watched something behind his eyes calculate, weigh, and finally collapse under the weight of the printed page between us. "I didn't think anyone would run the DNA," he said quietly, almost to himself, as if the thought had genuinely never occurred to him that a family with a professional geneticist inside it might actually verify a miracle before celebrating it. "That was your first mistake," I said. "Your second mistake was assuming grief makes people stupid instead of careful." I left his office without waiting for a confession, walked straight to my car and called Priya to confirm she'd already forwarded the full report and comparison data to the county sheriff's office under proper legal channels, ensuring nothing about how I'd obtained the initial sample could be challenged later. I drove back to my mother's house with the printed report folded in my coat pocket. The woman calling herself Ivy was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal, laughing softly at something my mother had just said. She looked so comfortable there, so thoroughly settled into a life that had never belonged to her. Renee, I said quietly, standing in the kitchen doorway. The spoon froze halfway to her mouth. My mother turned to look at me, confused, still smiling faintly from whatever joke had just passed between them. Ava, what are you? Her name is Renee Castillo, I said, my voice steady, my eyes locked on the woman at the table. She has done this twice before, in 2 other states, to 2 other grieving families. I have the DNA results in my coat pocket right now. She isn't Ivy. She was never Ivy. And she was hired by Ethan Brooks to be here. The color drained from Renee's face so fast it was almost violent to watch. My mother made a small, wounded sound and sank slowly into the chair beside her, staring back and forth between the two of us like the floor had genuinely opened beneath her feet. Renee set the spoon down slowly, deliberately, milk dripping unnoticed onto the table. For a moment, I thought she might keep lying, might try to cry her way through one more desperate performance. Instead, something in her posture simply collapsed, and what emerged instead was quiet, exhausted, and almost relieved. He found me 8 weeks ago, Renee said softly, not looking at either of us, her voice hollow. Ethan. He said there was a family with an old missing persons case and a trust about to expire. He said all I had to do was show up, cry a little, remember a few details he fed me from old newspaper archives and yearbook photos, and stay long enough to sign the transfer paperwork with your mother as a witness. He said he'd split the trust with me 60-40 once it cleared into an account he controlled. And Biscuit? I asked quietly. The cat? Renee let out a small, broken laugh, more air than sound. He never mentioned a cat. I panicked and guessed wrong. I knew the second I said it that I'd made a mistake, but by then it was already out of my mouth. My mother's hands were shaking now, pressed flat against the kitchen table as if she needed the solid wood to keep herself upright. Oh, her face carried a grief so raw it looked almost identical to the moment we'd first learned Ivy was missing, 10 years ago, all over again, now layered on top of a fresh and sickening betrayal. You let me hold you, my mother whispered, her voice breaking apart. You let me believe my daughter was finally home. I'm sorry, Renee said, and for the first time since she'd stepped through that door soaking wet, it actually sounded like she meant it. I've spent 10 years being other people's daughters and sisters because it's easier than being no one's anything. I didn't let myself think about what it would cost you until I was already standing on your porch, and you were already crying, and it was too late to turn around. I called the county sheriff's office directly from the kitchen while my mother sat in stunned, silent grief, and 2 deputies arrived within 20 minutes to take Renee into custody on outstanding warrants connected to her previous fraud cases in 2 other states. There was no crowd, no gala, no dramatic unmasking in front of 18 relatives. Just my mother's quiet kitchen, a bowl of soggy cereal going warm and forgotten on the table, and the sound of a woman who was never my sister being led out calmly to a patrol car in handcuffs, her head bowed against the rain. Ethan Brooks was arrested 4 days later, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, elder financial exploitation, and obstruction of justice. Once investigators traced a long series of encrypted messages between his personal phone and Renee's, laying out the entire scheme in exhausting, damning detail, down to the specific yearbook photographs he'd sourced her memorized details from. Investigators later discovered he had attempted an almost identical scheme once before, 3 years earlier, targeting a different grieving family and a different disputed trust, though that particular family had never caught on and had simply quietly settled. He is currently awaiting trial, and formal disbarment proceedings are already underway with the State Bar Association. The trust reverted exactly as my grandfather's original document specified, transferring in full to the wildlife conservation charity since the real Ivy never appeared in time to claim it. My mother didn't fight the outcome, didn't hire a second lawyer to contest it. She said quietly one evening while we did the dishes together that she never wanted the money in the first place. She only ever wanted her daughter. Renee Castillo pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and full cooperation in the ongoing case against Ethan Brooks. She is currently serving 18 months at a state facility 2 hours from here. For weeks afterward, Our house felt heavier than it had even in the rawest depths of the original grief, as though we'd been forced to lose Ivy a second time, in a new and uglier way that came with a name, a face, and a motive attached to it. My mother finally, gently, slowly, began packing away some of the items in Ivy's untouched room. Not erasing her, never erasing her, but quietly making a fragile peace with the fact that waiting frozen in time hadn't brought her daughter back and likely never would. I went back to my lab work, back to identifying strangers, matching fragments of degraded DNA to sprawling family trees for other people's cold cases, other people's missing daughters and sons, quietly hoping that somewhere, in some database, on some ordinary Tuesday, a fragment of my own sister's genetic code might finally surface among the millions of anonymous profiles I sift through every single week. Then, 6 weeks after Renee Castillo was formally sentenced, I received an email at my professional work account, sent from an anonymous, heavily encrypted server with no name attached anywhere in the header. It contained a single photograph. A woman in her mid-20s, sitting on a sunlit porch somewhere with palm trees blurred in the background, a small scar visible above her left eyebrow in exactly the right place. Beneath the photograph, a single careful line of text. I'm alive. I'm safe. I'm not ready yet. Please don't look for me, but please tell Mom I kept the cat's name after all. I have read that message more times than I can count. At my desk, in my car, lying awake at 2 in the morning with my phone held above my face in the dark. I haven't shown it to my mother yet. I don't know if I ever will. Not until I have something more solid than a single blurry photograph and 11 careful guarded words from someone who might, finally, actually be her. I used to believe the worst thing that could ever happen to a person was never knowing what happened to the people they love. Now I know there's something almost as difficult to carry. Being handed a fragile, uncertain thread of hope after you've already grieved someone twice, and having to decide, all over again, whether you're brave enough to hold on to it without letting it destroy you a third time. If you were in my position, would you tell your mother about that message right away? Or would you wait for something more certain first? Let me know exactly what you'd do in the comments below. Tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of family, identity, and the fragile, complicated truths we go looking for. Good night.